My name is Wendy Dixon. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents humiliated me so completely that something inside me finally stopped trying to survive them. It happened at their 40th wedding anniversary dinner, the kind of polished family celebration my mother lives for, with crystal glasses catching the chandelier light, white roses arranged in low silver bowls, and 30 guests, smiling as if they were lucky to be witnessing the success story of the Dixon family. From the outside, it probably looked beautiful. My father in his navy blazer, my mother glowing in cream silk, my younger sister laughing too loudly at her husband's jokes, the grandchildren dressed like little catalog models. Everything looked perfect. That was always the point. In my family, appearance mattered more than truth. I had been in that house since 7 that morning. I was the one who checked on the caterer, adjusted the seating cards, reheated the appetizers, polished the serving spoons when my mother decided they still looked cloudy, and ran upstairs twice to calm my niece when her curls started falling flat before guests arrived. By the time everyone sat down to dessert, my feet ached, my shoulders burned, and I still hadn't eaten a proper meal. But none of that was unusual. In the Dixon family, I was the extra pair of hands, the dependable one, the woman who could always be counted on to make things run smoothly, and then disappear before anyone asked who had done the work. At 9 o'clock, just after coffee was poured and the last of my mother's tiramisu had been served, my father stood and tapped his fork gently against his champagne glass. The room softened into silence. People turned toward him with warm, expectant smiles, waiting for the speech. My mother reached for his arm and beamed up at him like they were still newlyweds, instead of two people who had spent 40 years perfecting the art of performance. I was standing near the kitchen doorway with a dessert plate in one hand and a linen napkin in the other, close enough to hear every word, far enough away to remain what I had always been in that house. Useful, but not central. My father thanked everyone for coming. He talked about marriage, loyalty, family, legacy, the usual words. Then his voice shifted into something almost playful, and he said they had one more surprise. The room brightened instantly. My sister Megan straightened in her chair. Her husband leaned back with that smug, polished smile he wore whenever expensive plans were about to be announced. My mother glanced around the table, delighted by the suspense she had created. Then my father lifted his glass and said, "Next week, we're taking the whole family to Maui for a second celebration." The room erupted. There were gasps, laughter, congratulations. Someone called it generous. Someone else said Hawaii in winter sounded like heaven. Megan let out a squeal so sharp and excited it made several people laugh. Even I smiled. For one foolish, fragile second, I actually believed I was included. I pictured warm air on my skin, ocean waves, a chair on a balcony where nobody needed anything from me. My first real vacation in years. Maybe the first one ever. I stepped forward before I could stop myself, already feeling something light and unfamiliar opening in my chest. "That sounds amazing," I said. "What time is our flight?" The question hung there longer than it should have. My father didn't answer. My mother's smile tightened first. Then my father looked at me with mild confusion, as if I had misunderstood something obvious. "You don't need the flight time, Wendy," he said. A few people shifted in their seats. I remember that. The tiny scrape of a fork against china. The clink of ice settling in a glass. My pulse started pounding so hard I could hear it. "I don't understand," I said. My mother exhaled softly, already irritated that I was making her explain something unpleasant in public. "Because you're not going," she said. "Someone has to stay behind and take care of the children." 30 people saw it happen. 30 people watched my father lower his glass. My mother smoothed the front of her dress. My sister stared down at the table without objecting, and me standing there in a plain black dress holding a dirty plate like hired staff who had spoken out of turn. No one said, "Surely you're joking." No one said, "That's cruel." No one said my name. In that long, airless silence, I understood something with terrible clarity. They were not excluding me from a vacation. They were announcing my place. Not daughter. Not guest, not family, just the woman who stayed behind, cleaned up, and made everyone else's life easier. And the worst part was this. Some small shattered part of me had expected it, and once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. What happened at the anniversary dinner wasn't some shocking new betrayal. It was only the first time my family had said the truth out loud, in front of other people, with nowhere for me to hide from it. For years, they had been teaching me my place in smaller ways, quieter ways, the kind that slip into your bones before you even realize they're there. That is how it works when you grow up, as the invisible one. No single moment seems big enough to protest. It is the accumulation that breaks you. One small dismissal after another, one quiet assumption after another, until the role they wrote for you starts to feel more real than your own name. The Dixons live in a white colonial house outside Boston, with black shutters, a brick walkway, and a lawn my mother keeps trimmed to the point of obsession. From the street, it looks like the kind of home that belongs in a holiday catalog. My mother loves that. She has always cared more about how things appear than how they feel. My father retired 3 years ago, after spending most of his career as a branch manager at a regional bank, and he still carries himself like every room should settle when he speaks. My mother never had a paid job, but she runs church committees, neighborhood events, and family dinners with the intensity of a woman managing a public image. In her mind, our family was not just a family. It was a presentation. My younger sister, Megan, fit that presentation perfectly. She was 3 years younger than me, pretty in that effortless, polished way my mother admired, and married to the kind of man my parents loved showing off. Derek Hartley, corporate attorney, expensive suits, confident smile. They had 2 children, Oliver and Sophie, and every visit they made to our parents' house felt like an event my mother had been preparing for all week. She lit up around Megan in a way she never did around me. Her voice changed. Softer, brighter, proud. And then there was me. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I worked as a part-time accountant with remote clients and flexible hours, which in my family's language meant I had no real life at all. When guests came over, my mother introduced Megan with details. Her husband's job, the children's schools, their vacations, their new car. Me? I got, "This is Wendy. She helps out." As if that explained everything worth knowing. At the time, I told myself it was harmless. A family pattern. A difference in personality. Megan liked attention, and I didn't. That was the lie I used to make it bearable. But the truth showed up in practical ways too. Megan's Lexus got the best spot in the driveway. My Honda went on the street because, as my mother once said, guests noticed the driveway first. At dinner, Megan sat near my parents while I ended up close to the kitchen, the most convenient place for someone expected to stand up often. If Derek needed more ice, if Oliver spilled his juice, if Sophie refused to eat, if dessert had to be plated, somehow those things drifted toward me, not because I volunteered every time, because everyone assumed I would handle them. And eventually, I did. Thanksgiving meant arriving before sunrise to prep vegetables and start the turkey while my mother supervised and corrected. Christmas meant wrapping gifts, arranging platters, washing crystal, and staying late after everyone else left because the kitchen looked impossible. Birthday parties for Oliver and Sophie were practically work shifts. I ordered balloons, filled favor bags, wiped sticky hands, kept children from knocking over decorations, and cleaned frosting off tables, while Megan smiled for photos and thanked everyone online for making the day so special. She never meant me in those posts. Not really. The worst part was not even the work, it was the certainty behind it. No one asked. They assigned, they expected, they built plans around my time as if it belonged to the family by default. Last year, when I said I might miss Oliver's birthday because I had a deadline for a client, my mother's face changed instantly. "Family comes first, Wendy," she said. "We all make sacrifices. We all." Even then, something in me had gone still at those words, because they were not true. Megan was allowed to be tired, overwhelmed, busy, important. I was expected to be available, reliable, grateful. Her stress was treated like a burden everyone should rally around. Mine was treated like a scheduling inconvenience. So when my parents stood in front of 30 guests and announced that Megan was going to Hawaii while I stayed behind with her children, it should have felt unbelievable. Instead, it felt horribly familiar. The only difference was that this time, they didn't bother disguising it as love. They simply said what my place had always been. And once I admitted that to myself, other memories began rising with it, especially one from 3 years earlier, when another person I trusted looked straight at me and decided I was easy to overlook. 3 years earlier, I had been sitting on the edge of Kevin's gray couch, still in my work clothes, when he told me he didn't love me anymore. There was no shouting, no slammed door, no betrayal dramatic enough to make a clean story out of later. He did it quietly, almost gently, which somehow made it worse. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with the tired expression people wear when they think honesty should earn them points for kindness. "You're a good person, Wendy," he said. "You really are. But I don't feel the way I used to." I remember staring at the ring, shaped mark his coffee mug had left on the table, waiting for the rest of it. Then he said, "You make everything easy. You're always there. And maybe that's the problem. Always there." That was the phrase that lodged in me. Not because it was cruel in some spectacular way, but because it wasn't new. My family had been saying versions of it for years without ever putting the words together so neatly. Reliable, available, convenient. A woman who made life easier for everyone else until they forgot she had a life of her own. I don't remember much about leaving Kevin's apartment. I remember cold air hitting my face, my keys slipping once in my hand, headlights smearing across wet pavement as I drove with tears. I kept blinking back because I didn't trust myself to pull over and start falling apart. When I got to my building, I parked outside and just sat there with the engine running. My apartment was upstairs, quiet and small, and full of the kind of silence that waits for you when nobody is expecting you home. I couldn't go in. Not yet. So I started walking. Boston at night has a strange loneliness to it when you don't belong anywhere in particular. I passed a laundromat glowing blue-white through steamed windows, a takeout place stacking chairs for closing, a liquor store with a metal grate already half pulled down. Halfway down the block, I noticed a pawn shop I'd passed 100 times without really seeing. A flickering neon sign buzzed in the window. I might have kept going, but something caught my eye inside the glass display near the front. It was a used Canon DSLR. Nothing fancy. The body was scuffed, the strap looked worn, and a small white price tag hung from the side. $180. I stood outside, staring at it longer than I should have. Then I went in. The man behind the counter pulled it from the case and set it gently in my hands. It felt heavier than I expected. Solid. Real. He said the battery still held a charge, and the lens was older but decent. I nodded as if I understood cameras, even though I didn't. For a second, I almost handed it back. I should have been saving money, not spending it on something random in the middle of a breakdown. But I looked down at it again and had the strangest thought. Maybe I needed something that could hold a view steady when I couldn't. So I bought it. For the first few weeks, I had no idea what I was doing. I watched free tutorials online late at night, sat cross-legged on my apartment floor with the manual open beside me, and took dozens of terrible pictures around the city. Brick walls, bus stops, crosswalks, steam rising from street grates. Most of the images were flat or blurry, and more than once I almost gave up. But every now and then, I caught something that made me pause. A woman in a diner uniform smoking alone behind the restaurant before dawn, a cashier rubbing her wrist under harsh fluorescent light. An older woman at a bus stop, standing perfectly still with a grocery cart beside her, as if patience itself had taken human form. I found myself drawn to women people passed without noticing. Women carrying groceries, children, laundry, grief. Women working, waiting, enduring. There was something in their faces that pulled at me before I had words for it. Not sadness exactly. Not defeat. Something quieter. The look of people who had learned how to keep going without being seen. That was what the camera gave me. Not happiness. Not confidence. Not right away. It gave me focus. It gave me a place to put all the feelings I couldn't explain. Through the lens, the details mattered. A tired shoulder. A clenched hand. The way morning light hit a lined face and made it look not worn down, but dignified. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was paying attention to something that was paying me back. I never told my family. The camera lived wrapped in an old cashmere scarf at the back of my closet, hidden behind winter boots and storage boxes like a secret I didn't trust anyone else to touch. If my mother had found it, she would have called it a hobby. Megan would have smiled that polite little smile and asked if I was becoming artsy now. I couldn't bear the thought of them shrinking it before it had the chance to become real. So I kept it to myself. I worked, I helped everyone, I showed up where I was expected to show up, and at night I built something nobody knew existed. At first, I told myself it was only helping me survive Kevin leaving, but slowly, quietly, it became more than that. It became the first thing in my adult life that belonged only to me. For a while, that was enough. I didn't need anyone to know about the camera, as long as I had it. During the day, I still lived the same life I had always lived. I answered emails from accounting clients, showed up when my family called, and kept myself useful in all the predictable ways. But at night, when my apartment finally went quiet, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and went through the photographs I had taken that week. Those hours became my real life, even before I was brave enough to call them that. At first, I photographed anything that caught my eye. Sidewalk shadows, rain on windows, steam rising from street grates in the winter. But slowly, my attention narrowed. I stopped looking for pretty things and started looking for true ones. A crossing guard in a neon vest standing in the dark before sunrise. A hotel housekeeper sitting on an overturned milk crate behind the building, rubbing one foot through her stocking before her shift. A woman in a grocery store parking lot leaning on her cart for just a second too long, like her body had asked for a break her day would not allow. Those were the moments that stayed with me. Quiet women, tired women, women carrying more than anyone seemed to notice. Without planning to, I started thinking of the series as Invisible Women. I made the Instagram account late one Tuesday night, still half convinced it was a ridiculous thing to do. No real name. No photo of myself. No mention of Boston, my family, or my job. Just the images. I uploaded 3 posts, stared at the screen for a full minute, then almost deleted the whole account before anyone could see it. Instead, I shut the laptop and went to bed feeling embarrassed, as if I had said something too personal out loud. For the first few months, almost nothing happened. A couple of likes here and there. One stranger followed me, then another. Sometimes I posted a photograph and checked the app too often for the next hour, pretending I didn't care whether anyone responded. Most people didn't, but every now and then, someone did. A woman sent me a message, saying one of the photos reminded her of her mother waiting for the bus after a hospital shift. Another said the women in my pictures looked tired in the exact way she felt at the end of every workday. Those messages mattered more than the numbers. They made me feel like I wasn't imagining it, like the thing I was seeing through the lens was real and other people could see it too. The account grew slowly after that, not in a dramatic way. More like a faucet that had finally started dripping. Someone shared one of my photos. A few more women found the page, then a few more. Over time, the messages grew longer. Strangers told me about their mothers, their aunts, their own lives. Nurses, cashiers, teachers, home health aides, women who spent their days holding up entire worlds while being looked through as if they were part of the wallpaper. By the end of the 3rd year, 12,000 people were following that quiet little account, and I still had not told my family it existed. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. My mother would call it nice in the same tone people use for children's crafts. Megan would ask whether I was making money yet, as if profit were the only measure of value. Derek would nod politely and move on to something he considered real work. They would not ruin it in some dramatic way. That was never their style. They would simply make it smaller, and I had worked too hard to build something that felt honest, just to hand it over and watch that happen. So I kept the two parts of my life separate. To my family, I was still dependable Wendy, the daughter with flexible hours and no urgent demands on her time. Online, I was only the eye behind the camera. Somewhere between those two versions of me, something stronger began to take shape. Not loud, not fearless, but real. There was only one person I eventually trusted with it: my Aunt Ruth. My mother called her the family disappointment, usually with that brittle little laugh she used whenever someone else's freedom made her uncomfortable. Ruth had left Massachusetts years earlier and built a life in California, where she ran a small café with a pottery studio in the back. In my mother's version of events, Ruth had thrown away security for a bohemian fantasy. In mine, she had escaped. I had been calling her every Sunday night for years, long before the photography started. She was the only person in the family who ever asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. One Sunday, after we'd been talking for almost an hour, I opened my gallery, stared at one photograph for a long moment, and sent it to her before I could lose my nerve. I didn't explain it. I just typed, "I took this." Then I set my phone face down on the table, picked it up again 10 seconds later, and stared at the screen waiting to find out whether the one thing I had built in secret was finally about to be seen. Ruth replied less than a minute later. "Wendy, this is really good." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed in my hand. Then another one appeared. "Did you take this?" My fingers actually hesitated over the keyboard before I answered. I typed yes, deleted it, typed it again, then finally sent. "I did." Her reply came back right away. "You have an eye, sweetheart. I mean that." I don't think anyone had ever said something like that to me before. Not in that direct, steady way. People had praised me for being dependable, thoughtful, helpful, easy to count on. But this was different. Ruth was not complimenting how well I supported everyone else. She was looking at something I had made and telling me it had value. I sat there at my kitchen table reading her words over and over, feeling almost embarrassed by how badly I needed them. That night, I sent her 3 more photographs. Then 2 more. Then one I had almost deleted because I thought the light was too flat and the composition wasn't strong enough. Ruth didn't give me vague encouragement. That was what made me trust her. She was specific. She told me which framing worked, which image carried the most emotion, which faces stayed with her after she looked away. She said the women in my pictures never felt pitied, only seen. That distinction mattered to her, and once she said it, it mattered to me too. After that, our Sunday phone calls changed. We still talked about ordinary things. Her café in Carmel-by-the-Sea, tourists asking foolish questions. Pottery students who either loved clay immediately or wanted to quit in frustration after 10 minutes. But now she asked about the photographs too. What I had been working on, whether I was still shooting in the mornings before work, whether I had posted anything new. Sometimes I would describe someone I'd seen that week, and Ruth would listen closely, as if the details mattered. In my family, no one ever asked what I noticed. Ruth always did. A few weeks later, sending her new work became part of my routine. If a post did better than usual, I told her. If I went several days without taking a single photo because everything looked dull to me, I told her that too. She never let me hide behind false modesty for long. "Stop talking about your work like it happened by accident, Wendy." Or, "You're allowed to take your own talent seriously." I saved more than one of those messages. By the 3rd year, the account had grown far beyond what I had expected, and Ruth was still the only person in my life who knew about it. Then, 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, she said something on the phone that made my whole body tense. "I hope you won't be mad at me," she said. I sat up straighter on the couch. What did you do? She gave a small laugh. I sent your Instagram page to a friend of mine. My stomach dropped. Ruth, just listen first. His name is Marcus Coleman. He owns a gallery in Monterey. It's small, but people take it seriously. He's been looking for emerging photographers, and I thought of you. For a second, I couldn't speak. I got up and walked to the window, staring out at the dark parking lot behind my building. My first feeling was not excitement, it was panic. You should have asked me first, I said quietly. You're right, she said. I should have. But Wendy, being scared doesn't mean this was the wrong thing. The next morning, I opened my inbox before work and saw an email from Coastal Light Gallery. I nearly closed it without reading. The subject line looked too formal, too improbable, like something meant for someone with credentials and confidence, and a real artistic life. Not someone like me, sitting in mismatched pajamas with second-day coffee beside the laptop and a client spreadsheet still open from the night before. But after staring at it for a full minute, I clicked. Marcus introduced himself, said Ruth had shared my work, and asked whether I would be interested in speaking with him about a possible exhibition. A possible exhibition. I read that phrase again and again until my hands started shaking. Then I closed the laptop, opened it, and read the email one more time just to make sure the words were still there. All morning I moved through my day in a daze. I answered client messages, returned a phone call, checked one of my reports. But my mind kept drifting back to that inbox, to those two impossible words. Possible exhibition. For almost 2 days, I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't interested, because I was terrified. Terrified of saying yes to something that might disappear. Terrified of believing in a door that could still close. But underneath all of that was something smaller and sadder. A part of me still didn't believe I was supposed to have a life larger than the one my family had assigned me. So while that email sat unanswered in my inbox, I went right on helping my mother prepare for the anniversary dinner, arranging centerpieces and listening to her fuss over linens and guest lists, all while one impossible thought kept pulsing quietly in the back of my mind. A gallery wants to talk to me. That thought followed me everywhere. A gallery wants to talk to me. It stayed with me while I stood in my mother's dining room, retying ivory ribbon around centerpieces she had already changed her mind about twice. It stayed with me while I rewrote place cards because she decided one couple should be moved farther from the draft near the French doors. It stayed with me while Megan sat at the kitchen island in leggings and a soft cream sweater, sipping iced tea and scrolling through vacation photos on her phone, occasionally glancing up just long enough to offer an opinion on work she had not touched. "Mom, the peonies looked better," she said. My mother barely glanced at the arrangement in my hands. "No, they were too loose. Wendy, put the roses back." I did. That was the strange divide in my life then. On the outside, everything looked the same. I still showed up early. I still fixed details no one else wanted to handle. I still moved through my family like a useful piece of furniture that could also answer questions. But inside, something had shifted. Every time I remembered Marcus Coleman's email, it was like feeling a pulse in a place that had been numb. By the second night, Ruth called. "You still haven't answered him, have you?" she asked. I was in my apartment, rinsing out a coffee mug at the sink. "How do you always know?" "Because you get quieter when something matters." I leaned against the counter. "I don't know what to say to him." "Yes, you do." "No," I said, more sharply than I meant to. "I know how to write back. I just don't know what happens after that." She was quiet for a second. "That's different." I looked around my kitchen. The chipped bowl by the stove. The stack of unopened mail on the table. My small, manageable life. "What if this is real?" I asked. "It is real," Ruth said. "He emailed you." "You know what I mean." Another pause. Then, more gently, "You mean what if your life changes?" I closed my eyes. Ruth understood my mother better than anyone, because she had spent years getting out from under the same way of thinking. In my mother's version of the family story, Ruth had thrown away a secure life to move to California and make pottery. In mine, she had built a life nobody else got to design for her. When I left Massachusetts, Ruth said, your mother acted like I was ruining everything. I wasn't. I was just choosing for myself, and that made her furious. I gripped the edge of the sink. She doesn't get to decide the size of your life, Wendy. Something in my chest tightened when she said it. Not because I had never heard words like that before, but because I had. I had just never believed they applied to me. You make it sound simple, I said. It's not simple, Ruth said. It's just worth doing. After we hung up, I stayed where I was for another minute, staring at the dark window over the sink. Then I dried my hands, took my laptop to the table, and opened Marcus's email again. My heart started pounding almost immediately. His message was still brief, still professional, still somehow hard to believe. He had looked through my work. He was interested in talking. He wanted to know whether I might be open to discussing a possible exhibition. That phrase alone made my stomach flip. I clicked reply. Then I sat there. I typed a sentence, deleted it, typed another, changed, thank you for reaching out, to, thank you for your email, changed it back again, then forced myself to stop fussing over words that were really just standing in for fear. I kept it simple. I thanked him for contacting me. I said I would be very interested in speaking with him. I attached the small portfolio he had asked for in his follow-up note and spent an embarrassingly long time second-guessing which images to include before choosing the ones that felt most honest. For one ridiculous second, with everything ready, I almost closed the laptop. Instead, I hit send. The email vanished from the screen, and the room went still. Nothing changed right away, of course. My apartment did not grow bigger. My bank account did not transform. My mother did not suddenly become kinder. The next morning, she still called before 9 with another list of anniversary tasks, and I still went over there and helped her fold napkins and polish serving trays and track down the missing place cards she swore she had left on the buffet. But something had changed in me. For the first time in years, I had answered something that wanted more from me than sacrifice. I had said yes to a possibility that belonged only to me. And by the time my parents' anniversary dinner arrived, that quiet little yes was the only thing in my life that felt like solid ground. By the time the anniversary dinner arrived, I had already spent most of the week helping build an evening that was never really meant for me. I got to my parents' house a little after 7 that morning in jeans, sneakers, and an old navy sweater, because there was no point dressing nicely when I knew I'd spend the day carrying boxes, fixing flowers, and cleaning up after everyone else. My mother was already in motion by the time I walked in, moving through the kitchen with that clipped, restless energy she always had before an event. "You're late," she said. It was 7:04. I had to stop for ice. "Well, put it in the garage freezer. The candles still need to be set out, the place cards are on the buffet, and don't move the Hendersons yet, because I may switch them with the Callaways. Also, Megan wants to know what linens we decided on." I set my bag down and went to work. By 8:30, the house smelled like lemon polish and rosemary. By 10, every room looked staged. I ironed table runners, adjusted flowers, carried extra chairs in from the garage, and polished silver my mother had already polished once herself, but no longer trusted. I relit candles she thought were burning unevenly. I made 3 separate trips upstairs because she kept changing her mind about where to put framed anniversary photos. Sometime around noon, I ate half a granola bar standing over the sink and chased it with lukewarm water from the tap because nobody had thought to ask whether I'd eaten. Megan arrived just after 12. Not to help, to appear. She walked in wearing oversized sunglasses and a soft cream cashmere set that somehow managed to look casual and expensive at the same time. She kissed my mother on the cheek, handed me her keys without really looking at me, and said, "Can you grab the gift bags from the back seat? I don't want the kids crushing them." Then she stepped into the dining room and actually gasped. "Oh, Mom, this looks incredible." I was standing right there, holding her keys in one hand and florist scissors in the other. My mother smiled the way she always smiled when Megan admired something. Warm, pleased, almost girlish. "Doesn't it?" she said. I wanted it to feel elegant but still intimate. I went outside, got the gift bags, and brought them in without a word. That was how the day moved. My mother directing, Megan admiring, me handling whatever needed to be done in between. By 6 o'clock, the house looked exactly the way my mother wanted it to. Candles glowed on the mantel. White and blush roses sat in polished bowls. The long dining table stretched into the living room under white linen and gold-rimmed china. Everything was beautiful. Everything was in place. I finally went upstairs to change into the black dress I had brought. Simple enough not to draw attention, neat enough not to embarrass my mother. When I stepped into the hallway, she looked me over and frowned slightly. That's what you're wearing? It's black, I said. It's fine, she said after a beat. Just stay in the background tonight. This evening is about your father and me. I nodded, because that was easier than saying what I thought. Guests started arriving at 7. Men in sports coats, women in silk blouses and cocktail dresses. Old church friends, neighbors, my father's former colleagues, people who had known my parents for years and thought they understood our family because they had seen us smiling in the same room often enough. I moved among them with trays of appetizers and bottles of wine, taking coats, refilling glasses, answering practical questions, slipping in and out of conversations that never quite included me. At 7:15, Megan made her real entrance. She had changed into a red wrap dress that fit her perfectly. Derek followed in a charcoal suit, with Oliver and Sophie dressed like they were on their way to a department store photo shoot. My mother lit up the second she saw them. She crossed the room with both hands out, exclaiming over Megan's dress, Derek's tie, the children's shoes, the whole polished little tableau of them. Then, as always, she turned them into an announcement. Everyone, you remember my daughter Megan and her husband Derek, she called brightly. Derek made partner last year, and we're just so proud. The room filled with approving smiles and congratulations. I was standing in the kitchen doorway holding a tray of bruschetta. One woman near the drinks table smiled at me and asked, "Oh, are you with the caterer?" Before I could answer, my mother glanced over and said, "No, that's Wendy, my other daughter. She's helping tonight." My other daughter. She's helping. The woman looked embarrassed for a second and reached for an appetizer. I smiled automatically, the way I always did when something landed hard and I didn't want anyone to see it. Across the room, Megan was laughing beside Derek, while my mother stood glowing in the middle of the family she wanted everyone else to admire. And there I was, carrying the food, refilling the glasses, disappearing into the edges of the room, so smoothly it was almost as if I had been trained for it. For most of the evening, I stayed exactly where my mother liked me at the edges of the room, close enough to be useful, far enough not to matter. I passed appetizers, cleared empty glasses, answered the front door twice when late guests arrived, and slipped into the kitchen more times than I could count. At one point, Oliver refused to eat anything from the buffet because the tiny tea sandwiches looked, in his words, gross. So I stood at the counter, cutting the crusts off peanut butter bread and hunting down his favorite dinosaur cup because I was the one who always knew where everything was. By the time dessert came out, my feet were aching and I still had not eaten a real meal. There were warm plates ready for guests, coffee being poured into delicate cups, and my mother's tiramisu arranged beautifully on gold-rimmed china. No one had thought to save me anything. That was not unusual enough to surprise me. Megan and Derek floated through the evening in the polished, easy way they always did, smiling, laughing, accepting admiration they had not earned. At one point, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway with Sophie on his hip and Oliver dragging at his pant leg. "Can you take them for a minute?" he asked. "No, please. No, thank you. Just the assumption." I took Sophie from his arms and led both kids to the breakfast nook. I found apple slices, napkins, extra juice boxes, and the little plastic cup Oliver liked best. I wiped Sophie's sticky hands and listened while Oliver explained, with total seriousness, why he thought the dog loved him more than anyone else in the family. From the dining room, I could hear laughter rise and fall in waves, silverware touching china, my mother's voice carrying above the rest whenever she reached the dramatic part of a story. By the time I came back out, Coffee had been served, and dessert plates were already being passed around. Then my father stood. He tapped his spoon lightly against his champagne glass, and the room softened into silence. Conversations drifted down. Chairs shifted. Everyone turned toward him with the same warm, expectant expression people always wore around my parents, as if they were about to witness something graceful and enviable. My mother straightened beside him, one hand resting on the back of her chair, pleased already. Megan leaned into Derek. I stopped near the kitchen doorway with a used dessert plate still in my hand. My father thanked everyone for coming. He talked about 40 years of marriage, about loyalty, about family, about how blessed he and my mother felt to celebrate this milestone surrounded by the people they loved most. The guests smiled and nodded in all the right places. Then his voice lifted, brightening with practiced suspense. "And to celebrate," he said, raising his glass slightly, "we have one more surprise." A little ripple moved through the room. Someone laughed. Someone else said, "Oh, how exciting." Megan sat up straighter. My mother's smile sharpened with pleasure. "Next week," my father said, "we're taking the whole family to Maui. 1 week at the Four Seasons, just us." The room broke into delighted noise. Gasps, congratulations, soft exclamations of envy. Megan actually squealed. Even Oliver, hearing the excitement without understanding it, started bouncing in his seat. And for one small, foolish second, I let myself believe I was included. The whole family. I pictured warm air, blue water, a hotel balcony above the ocean. A week where no one needed me to carry anything, clean anything, fix anything. A week where maybe I could just exist without being assigned a role. Before I could stop myself, I stepped slightly forward. "That sounds amazing," I said. "What time is our flight?" The silence came down too fast. Not the comfortable pause of someone about to answer, but the hard, strange kind that makes every nerve in your body wake up at once. My father looked at me. My mother glanced at him, then back at me, her smile already thinning. "You don't need the flight time, Wendy," my father said. The plate in my hand suddenly felt slippery. "I don't understand," I said. My mother pressed her lips together for half a second, as if annoyed that this had to be explained in front of other people. Then she said, very evenly, "Because you're not going. Someone has to stay behind with the children." A nervous little laugh came from somewhere near the back of the room, then died instantly. For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. Megan looked down at the table. Derek didn't meet my eyes. My father cleared his throat and added, in the calm tone of a man explaining something perfectly reasonable, "Megan and Derek deserve a real vacation. The kids are happiest with you anyway." No one spoke. No one said that was cruel. No one said there must be some misunderstanding. 30 people just sat there in a room full of candlelight and polished silver, while I stood in a black dress with a dirty dessert plate in my hand and realized my parents were not excluding me by accident. They were announcing my place. Not daughter, not guest, not family. Help. I don't remember deciding to read the email. I only remember the feeling that if I didn't, I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether what had happened in that dining room had been cruelty or just carelessness dressed badly. The laptop sat open on my mother's kitchen counter, the overhead light throwing a pale yellow circle across the keys. The house was silent now. My parents had gone upstairs. Megan and Derek had taken the children home. The guests were gone, the candles burned low, and I was still standing there in my black dress with my hair half falling down, staring at a subject line that looked too deliberate to ignore. Hawaii arrangements. Wendy situation. For a second, my hand just rested on the trackpad. Then I clicked. The email thread opened between my mother and Megan. The first message was dated a week before the anniversary dinner. My mother had written it in the brisk, practical tone she used for grocery lists and church planning and all the other little operations she ran with cold efficiency. "Keep Wendy here to watch the kids. She doesn't have anything important to do anyway. Derek's right, it's like having free help. She should be grateful we give her something useful to do." I read it once, then again. I wasn't crying. That was the strange part. My face felt perfectly still, almost numb, while something much deeper seemed to give way inside me with a slow, final crack. I scrolled down. Megan had answered 20 minutes later. Totally agree. She'll probably feel useful for once. It's kind of sad, honestly, but at least it works for us. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Feel useful for once. Kind of sad. It wasn't the meanness that hurt most. It was the casualness, the ease. The fact that neither of them had needed to work themselves into cruelty. They had arrived there naturally, the way some people reach for a favorite mug without thinking. This was simply how they saw me when they weren't performing family for other people. Free help. Useful for once. It's kind of sad. Every humiliation from the night suddenly rearranged itself into something cleaner and uglier. The announcement. The silence. Megan looking down at the table, instead of speaking up. Derek handing off the children as if logistics had already been settled. They hadn't improvised any of it. They had planned it, discussed it, named me in writing like I was a staffing problem to solve. Before the vacation. I should have closed the laptop right then. I should have walked away, gone home, and let disgust do what grief could not. Instead, I took out my phone. My hands were steady now. Strangely steady. Like some instinct in me had finally switched from hurt to survival. I took screenshots of the whole thread, one after another, making sure the dates and names were visible. Then I emailed them to myself. I checked twice to be certain they had gone through. After that, I deleted the sent email from my mother's account and cleared the browser history, not because I was ashamed, but because I suddenly understood that people like my mother only respected evidence when it could damage them. When I was done, I sat down at the kitchen table in the house, where I had grown up, and looked around, as if I had never really seen it before. The polished cabinets, the framed family photos, the bowl of lemons on the island, the hand towels my mother changed every season. For years, I had believed this house contained some version of home I just hadn't earned yet. Some warmer room I would eventually be invited into if I worked hard enough, helped enough, asked for little enough. But sitting there with those screenshots on my phone, I understood something I should have understood much earlier. There was no warmer room. This was it. This was what they thought of me when they were honest. Not difficult. Not disappointing. Not even worthy of anger. Just available. Useful. Convenient. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the refrigerator motor to kick on and off twice. Long enough for the last of the candlelight in the dining room to disappear. Long enough for the humiliation to stop feeling sharp and start becoming something colder. Clarity. By the time I finally stood up, it was after 1 a.m. I took my coat from the chair by the door, turned off the kitchen light, and walked out of my parents' house without leaving a note. The drive back to my apartment was almost empty. Boston, after midnight, looked washed out and distant. Traffic lights changing for nobody. Storefronts dark. My headlights sliding over quiet intersections I had driven through 100 times before. When I got home, I didn't even take my shoes off right away. I stood in the middle of my living room, with my phone still in my hand, and opened the screenshots again, as if I needed proof that I had not imagined them. Then, without giving myself time to think better of it, I called the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. Ruth answered on the second ring. "Wendy?" she said, instantly awake. "What happened?" And that was the moment I knew I was done protecting people who had never once protected me. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice rough with sleep, but instantly alert. "Wendy?" she said. "Are you okay?" I sat down on the arm of my couch because my legs suddenly didn't feel steady enough to trust. The screenshots were still open on my phone, my mother's words glowing against the dark room. "No," I said. Then I took a breath. Mom and Megan planned it. The trip, leaving me behind with the kids, all of it. There was a rustle on the other end of the line, the sound of Ruth sitting up, a lamp clicking on. "What do you mean, planned it?" So I told her. I told her about my father's speech, about the room going silent after I asked what time our flight was, about my mother saying someone had to stay behind with the children as if she were assigning a task, not cutting me out of the family. Then I read the email thread to Ruth word for word. I only had to stop once, and even then it wasn't because I was crying. It was because hearing the words, "free help" in my mother's voice, made me feel suddenly hollow. When I finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very simply, "Come here." I closed my eyes. What? Come to California. The words were so direct, so practical, that for a second I just stared at the wall in front of me. Ruth, I can't just leave. Yes, you can. I have clients. Rent. My car needs an oil change. I can't just disappear in the middle of everything. Wendy, she said, and her voice softened just enough to make me listen. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You just have to get out of a place that is breaking you. I said nothing. I have the room above the café, she went on. It's small, but it's clean. You can stay there as long as you need. I could use help in the mornings, and Marcus is close enough if you want to meet him. You don't need a 5-year plan tonight. You need somewhere safe to land. Somewhere safe to land. I looked around my apartment, the second-hand couch, the lamp I bought at a thrift store, the cardigan I had dropped over the dining chair 3 days ago and never picked up again. Everything in that room suddenly looked like part of a life I had been surviving, not choosing. I don't know if I'm brave enough for this, I whispered. You don't need brave tonight, Ruth said. You just need honest. Do you want to stay there and keep letting them do this to you? The answer came so fast it startled me. No. Then come. We stayed on the phone a while longer after that, and what helped most was that Ruth kept it practical. She told me where to park when I got there. She warned me the room above the cafe had an ocean view and terrible insulation. She said morning shifts started at 6 and the bakery deliveries came before dawn. Then, more quietly, she told me Marcus had emailed again that afternoon. He was serious about meeting. After we hung up, I sat still for another minute with my phone in my hand. Then I got up and opened my closet. At first I just stood there staring at everything, suddenly overwhelmed by the ordinary reality of leaving. Which shoes? Which coats? How many sweaters? I pulled out a suitcase, opened it on the bed, and froze again. Then I made myself start with the obvious things. Jeans, underwear, socks, toiletries, my laptop, chargers, camera equipment, the folder with my tax documents, the old cashmere scarf that had wrapped my Canon for 3 years, went in next. Around 2:30 in the morning, I found the glittery apron Megan had given me for Christmas 2 years earlier. World's best aunt. I held it for a second, thumb pressed against the cheap sparkling letters. Then I folded it once and dropped it into the donation pile on the floor beside the dresser. A little after 3, I checked my bank app, mapped the drive, and sent Marcus a short reply. Thank you for your patience. I'm coming to California and would be glad to meet. After that, I turned off my phone. When the sun finally came up, pale through the blinds, I was still awake. 2 suitcases stood by the door. A third was half full on the bed. I was exhausted, shaky, and nowhere near calm. But underneath all of that was something I had not felt in a very long time. Relief. For the first time in 32 years, I was not waiting for my family to make room for me. I was making my own. By the time I drove back to my parents' house 2 days later, I had already packed most of my life into the trunk of my Honda and told myself, over and over, that I was only there to say what needed saying. Not to argue, not to beg, not to make them understand. Just to tell the truth once, clearly, and leave. My mother was in the living room when I walked in, surrounded by open suitcases and piles of resort clothes arranged by outfit, as if Hawaii were a campaign she intended to win. Megan sat cross-legged on the couch beside her, scrolling through restaurant reviews on her phone and half listening while my mother debated whether linen wrinkled too easily for travel. My father was in his usual chair with the newspaper open, though he lowered it the second he saw me. The room looked exactly like the kind of family scene I had spent years helping construct comfortable, coordinated, unquestioned. "I need to tell you something," I said from the doorway. My mother didn't even look up at first. "If it's about the children's schedule, Megan already texted it to you. It's not about that." That got her attention. She looked up, annoyed more than curious. Megan's eyes flicked toward me, then back to her phone. "I'm not watching the kids," I said. "I won't be here next week." The silence that followed felt entirely different from the one at the anniversary dinner. This time, it wasn't public shame. It was disruption. A machine missing a gear. My mother set down a folded sundress. "What do you mean you won't be here?" "I mean I'm leaving tomorrow. I have an opportunity in California." My father lowered the paper all the way. "California?" Megan stared at me now. "You cannot be serious." "I am." For a second, nobody spoke. Then my mother stood up slowly, her face changing in stages. Confusion first, then disbelief, then the cold anger I knew better than almost anything. "This is not funny, Wendy. I'm not joking." Megan gave a short laugh, the brittle kind people use when reality is still too inconvenient to accept. "Okay, what opportunity? What are you even talking about?" I could have told them about the gallery, about Marcus, about the account I had built without any of them noticing. But standing there in that room, looking at the same people who had written me into an email thread like hired help, I realized I did not owe them access to the part of me they had never cared enough to ask about. "It's work," I said, "and I'm going." Megan sat forward so fast, her phone slid off her lap. "Wendy, no, absolutely not. Derek and I planned this around you." I looked at her. "Exactly." She blinked. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you planned my time without asking me. You arranged my life like I was already assigned to you." My mother stepped in before Megan could answer. "Family does that for each other." "Family?" I repeated. "You told 30 people I wasn't family enough to come to Hawaii." A flash of something crossed her face, then guilt, maybe, or irritation that I had dared to say it plainly, but it disappeared almost at once. "You are being dramatic," she said. "Someone had to stay with the children." "Why me?" "Because you have the flexibility." There it was, the clean, polished version of the same cruelty. Not free help this time. Flexibility. My father finally spoke. "Wendy, your mother is just saying Megan needs support right now." "Megan needs childcare," I said. "Those are not the same thing." Megan's face hardened. "Wow. No," I said, and I could feel something steadying inside me now. Not rage exactly, something calmer and harder than that. "What's wow is that none of you even asked. You announced it in front of a room full of people like I should be grateful." My mother crossed her arms. "You're tearing this family apart over one vacation." I almost laughed. "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you decided I was useful, but not included." That landed. I saw it in the way Megan looked away, in the way my father shifted in his chair, in the way my mother's mouth tightened because she recognized the sentence as true and hated me for saying it out loud. Then my father did what he had always done when kindness failed him. He reached for authority. "If you walk out now," he said, "don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms." The old me would have folded at that. Would have heard threat where there was really only control. But something in me had moved too far to return. "I understand," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. My mother called after me as I turned toward the door. "Wendy, if you do this, don't expect Megan to forgive you." I stopped with my hand on the knob and looked back at the three of them, my mother standing rigid with fury, my father stiff with wounded pride. Megan flushed with outrage because, for once, she was the one being inconvenienced. Then I said the truest thing I had ever said in that house. "That's okay. I'm finally starting to forgive myself." And I walked out before any of them could answer. I did not look back as I walked to my car. My mother was still speaking behind me, her voice sharp through the open doorway, but the words lost shape before they reached the driveway. For once, I did not stop to explain myself. I did not go back to soften what I had said. I did not apologize for making things difficult. I got into my Honda, closed the door, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel while my heart pounded so hard it felt like I had just run a mile. Then I started the engine and drove away. The next 24 hours passed, in a blur of motion. My mother called 6 times. My father left one voicemail that was only 20 seconds long, but somehow managed to sound both disappointed and offended. Megan texted twice, first angry, then pleading. The second message was the one that almost got to me. "You're really doing this to us?" Us. As if I were the one abandoning family. As if I had not spent years being abandoned in smaller, quieter ways that left no visible bruises. I read the message once, then deleted it. After that, I turned my phone off and finished packing the last of what mattered. When the sun rose the next morning, Boston looked washed pale and unfamiliar through my windshield. I dropped my spare key and rent envelope through my landlord's mail slot, loaded the final suitcase into the trunk, and stood for one last second beside the car. My apartment building, the cracked sidewalk, the narrow strip of winter grass by the curb, none of it felt sentimental. It felt finished. The drive to California took 5 days. I did not rush it. I slept in small roadside motels, drank burnt coffee from paper cups, and ate in diners where no one knew my name or asked anything of me beyond whether I wanted a refill. Somewhere in Ohio, I stopped at a gas station and realized I had been clenching my jaw for so long it hurt to relax it. Somewhere in Nebraska, I pulled over just to watch the sky go pink over a flat stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. I took a picture of it from the side of the road, the first photograph I had taken in days, and when I looked at it later, I realized it was the first image I had ever made that felt like freedom. By the time I crossed into California, I was too tired to feel triumphant. But when the Pacific finally appeared, blue and open under the late afternoon light, something in me loosened. I rolled down the window and let the salt air hit my face. I cried then, not because I was broken, but because I wasn't. Ruth was waiting for me outside the café when I pulled in. She did not ask me if I was sure. She did not tell me I had done the right thing. She simply opened her arms and said, "You made it." And that was enough. That night, standing in the small room above her café with my camera on the dresser and the sound of the ocean somewhere beyond the window, I understood the truth my family had spent years trying to bury. I had never been too small for a real life. I had just been surrounded by people who needed me to believe I was. They could keep Hawaii. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like home. Sometimes, the people who call themselves family only love the version of you that is easy to use. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. The moment you stop begging for a place at their table, you make room to build your own life, your own peace, and your own worth.